Hey Paizo, got a quick request on behalf of my 3-month-old son. He would really like to know if you could add the special Ferocious Headbutt class feat to the Monk class. He's looking for some good options as he levels up. You know, that raises the question, what would be the best class for my son to progress into? Well, today we're going to look at all of the classes for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, including the ones from the Advanced Player's Guide, and we're going to compare them to one another on this episode of the Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I'm a storyteller who can't wait for the witch's patron to begin teaching them some lessons. Welcome to my channel where we talk about role-playing games like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today we're going to be revisiting an old video. About 3 months ago I did a little bit of a silly conversation video where I ranked all of the classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition according to how interesting those classes were and how compelling characters of that type would be for me as a gamer. Well, since then, we've had a lot more material come out, especially the Advanced Player's Guide for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and there are a variety of new options available, so that raises the question, how do all of these classes stack up against one another in light of the new options that are available? Well, today I'm going to be giving my opinion on all 16 classes for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and I'm also going to include a hypothetical look at the Magus and the Summoner class that are currently being playtested for the book Secrets of Magic. Now, a few things to note about today's list. Number one, this ranking is entirely my own subjective opinion, and as we all know, the subjective opinion of some random guy on YouTube is clearly the gospel truth, and I expect to see all kinds of comments down below expressing your agreement with my opinions. Yes, this can't possibly backfire. While you're down there commenting, if you enjoy this video, like it and share it, subscribe to the channel. We have a lot more content that is being scripted and will be coming out soon. In regards to the opinions I will be expressing, the way I evaluate the classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition leans more towards the flavor side of the class. I've spoken in other videos about how I consider Pathfinder 2nd Edition to be a very mechanically solid game, and it is my personal opinion that you can make very effective characters with basically every class in the game. So it's not so much the mechanics of the character as it is the flavor of the character that really determines how engaging that class is for me as a player. As a result, you may see a mechanically strong class lower on this list, or a mechanically weaker class a little bit higher on the list, because there's something in the flavor of the class that really speaks to me as a player. I will say this about every class that is appearing on this list. I feel like the Advanced Player's Guide brought some incredible options into the game. I feel like especially the core 12 classes to the game have all seen some dramatic improvements over the last few months, and I feel like the variety of character options available are universally strong. Though I'm going to be ranking these classes and I'm going to be giving them a pecking order of which ones are less appealing and which ones are more appealing, I will go ahead and say that all of these classes definitely have some appeal to me. So even classes that are lower down on the list, I still think that there is plenty to like about these classes. So naturally, as we're going through this list, I'm going to talk about the things I like with each class. I'm going to talk about some of my gripes with the classes, and here and there I may interject a few wishes that I have for each class that I think could improve them as Paizo looks at future products. Now, before we can go into the new list, I do think really quick we need to look at the old list so that you have a point of comparison on my thoughts. So real quick, here is the ranking from my previous video. At number 12, we had the Cleric. Number 11 was the Fighter. Numbers 10, 9, and 8 honestly were interchangeable for me, but it was the Sorcerer, the Ranger, and the Rogue. Number 7 was the odd class on the list, which was the Bard. Number 6 was the Monk, my son Nicholas's favorite. Number 5 was the Champion. Number 4 was my all-time favorite class, the Wizard. Number 3 was the king of subclasses, the Barbarian. Number 2 was the most flexible class, the Alchemist. And number 1 was the standard bearer for the new primal spellcasting tradition, and the class that can cast the greatest spell ever written, Kaiju form. That's right, number 1 on the list was Druid. But that was yesterday. How do the classes stack up now, and what are my thoughts on the classes as they exist currently in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? Well, let's get started. To keep this video from being too long, what I think I'm going to do is I'm actually going to break my list into chunks. While there will be a numerical ranking for all of the classes, I do feel like the list that I'm presenting today, that there are definite patterns that can be observed for classes in certain parts of the list. So I'm going to be breaking this list into 4 parts. The lowest tier will be the niche play characters. Above that, we will have the short-term campaign characters. Above that, we're going to have the backup characters. And then we will have the cream of the crop, the main classes that I find compelling and that I really want to roll up for a game of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So let's get started. Alright, so up first we have what I'm going to call my niche play classes. These are the classes that are probably only going to see play for me personally in the exact right circumstances. Number 16, the Investigator. Number 15, the War Priest Cleric. Number 14, the Ranger. And number 13, the Swashbuckler. So really the problem for all 4 of these classes is that the appeal of the class just is not broad enough for me to want to bust one of these classes out apart from very specific circumstances or very niche aspects of play. The class that suffers from this the most is number 16, the Investigator Class. This is one of the new classes from the Advanced Player's Guide, and Paizo has said that all 4 of these classes are more advanced, as per the name, than the core 12 classes to the game. They require a little bit more thought, they require a little bit more engagement to be able to use and play. So I will go ahead and say, in evaluating the 4 new classes, I definitely stopped to consider how accessible these new classes were. I don't mind more advanced concepts in the game, but a more advanced concept is by definition a little bit less accessible. The Investigator, unfortunately for me, is honestly the class that should have been an archetype. In the Advanced Player's Guide, they released 42 new archetypes, and one of the things that they did is they took a couple of old 1st edition classes and brought them into 2nd edition, not as full classes, but rather as archetypes that you could put on top of a regular class. A couple of examples of this are the Cavalier and especially the Vigilante class. The change from a Vigilante being a full class to being an archetype that layers on top of a regular class was a phenomenal change. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was very intelligent on the part of Paizo, and honestly, I wish they had done the same thing with the Investigator. I feel like the Investigator is a concept that is really, really good in really specific stories. Is it a horror adventure or an urban adventure, such as the Agents of Edgewatch adventure path that's currently being published? Or, most appropriately, is it a mystery adventure? If you've got one of those 3 types of stories going on, the Investigator is great. And if you don't have one of those 3 types of stories going on, the Investigator loses a lot of appeal really, really quickly. That's the reason I say that this class honestly would have been better as an archetype. I feel like in some games, Investigator is going to be top of the list of things that you want to take, and I feel like in other games, the Investigator's not even going to cross your mind as an option. It's really an either or. If it's the right game, it's good. If it's the wrong game, it's probably not worth your time. And so, overall, I feel like most games of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the Investigator really isn't a class that I'm going to gravitate towards, or that many other players are going to gravitate towards. Here's the truth. If I want to play an Investigator, I'm probably playing Call of Cthulhu instead. I come to Pathfinder 2nd Edition for a certain style of game, and I'm just not sure that the Investigator was the right class for that style of game. However, let me say this class still is well done, there's still a lot of potential here, and if you have a skilled or accommodating DM, I do think that you can fit the Investigator in most different types of adventures. So, it is the bottom of my list, but in the right story, I will still say I would consider rolling an Investigator. Moving to number 15 on my list, you'll notice I'm already cheating with this list. It's the Priest Cleric. On my previous list, I really complained about the fact that the Priest version of the Cleric, past like level 10, just felt uninspiring next to the Cloistered Cleric or the spellcasting focused Cleric. Well, if I'm being honest, I don't feel like the Advanced Player's Guide has really changed this situation. In fact, most of the material that has been released I feel like has gone more towards the Cloistered Cleric, and as a result I feel like the Priest Cleric has almost become its own separate class, and it's just not a deep or engaging class for me. Now, I will say, I've seen a lot of arguments that the Priest is phenomenal for low-level play. If you're doing levels 1 through 10, the Priest is very functional, it's got a lot of utility, and it is a fantastic class. Low-level play, I do think the Priest is good, but if the campaign's going to go past level 10, I just don't know that I would roll one of these up. Paizo, if you're seeing this video, please put out some more high-level material for the Priest, because right now, the class is kind of starving. Number 14 on my list is the Ranger. And I kind of feel bad putting the Ranger so low on the list, because mechanically, this is a very solid and engaging class. If you're looking for just like single target DPS, if you want a class that can just take down one thing and one thing specifically, the Ranger is phenomenal. I've got a video on this channel that kind of celebrates the ridiculous single target options that Rangers get. Mechanically, it is a good class. Just not a very engaging one for me. Most of the things that I really enjoy about the Ranger, for example, the animal companion options, you can do that with other classes. In fact, thanks to the Beastmaster archetype from the Advanced Player's Guide, you can do that with any class now. The Ranger is good, it just doesn't have anything specific that would compel me to choose it over another class in the game. I will say this though, if I was ever going to be in a tournament style game or a competition style game, like a one-shot at a con or something like that, Ranger is a class I would definitely consider busting out in those specific instances, just because the single target takedown ability of the Ranger class is really, really good. But outside of one-shot games, I don't know that I'm ever going to bust out a Ranger. And then number 13, the highest ranking of my niche classes is the Swashbuckler. And honestly, this one was a hard one for me. It is difficult for me to be objective with the Swashbuckler class because this is a style of character that I just don't enjoy very much. If you saw my previous video, you know that I admitted I tend to be biased against rogues, and that bias kind of goes over into the Swashbuckler category too. Basically, my mindset on the Swashbuckler can be defined as, oh yes, this is what fantasy RPGs really needed, another Dex as God stat class. Yay. listen, that's the bias inside my head talking. When I try to look at this class objectively, I will admit there are some fun ideas here. In fact, Paizo did one thing really, really well with this class, only to drop the ball at the last second. And that beautiful thing that they dropped was panache. So the Swashbuckler is intended to be this dramatic, over-the-top warrior who acts with flair and daring and cunning, who is doing crazy over-the-top stunts in combat, and gains bonuses for doing those sort of things. If you've seen my other videos, you know that should appeal to me. That is my preferred way to run fantasy RPGs. I like high adventure, high action. I like over-the-top crazy stunts. A lot of DMs would disagree with me, but I actually build a little bit of plot armor into all of my PCs just because I want them to do crazy over-the-top things. And the panache mechanic for the Swashbuckler really plays to that style. Do something daring, you gain panache. When you have panache, you have crazy bonuses, and you can gamble that panache to unleash devastating finishers on your enemies. This is a mechanic that has my name written all over it. There are plenty of reasons for me to like the Swashbuckler, but Paizo did one thing that just killed the class for me. All Swashbucklers can gain panache by tumbling through the space of an enemy. The tumble through action is one option for gaining panache. And then every other subclass has a list of specific actions that allows them to gain panache as well. For example, if you're playing the Gymnast variant of the Swashbuckler, certain combat maneuvers such as shove or trip can give you panache as well. And here's the reason this bothers me. Thematically, what Paizo has done is they've said, here's a class so you can play ridiculously over-the-top characters under very specific circumstances. No. No, no, no. That killed the panache mechanic for me. If I want my characters to do crazy over-the-top things, I shouldn't be handing them a list of what crazy over-the-top should look like. Paizo, why did you do this to me? I wanted to like the Swashbuckler, and you made a really narrow list of actions for a class that should be appealing to the playstyle I love the most. Honestly, I am probably only going to bust out a Swashbuckler if I am playing with the DM with a very loose and liberal interpretation of what qualifies for panache in their games. If it's a DM who's going to be very strict on when you can gain panache, this class it's not going to be for me. But I will say this, Paizo, I noticed some of those crazy Goblin Swashbuckler combos, and I will admit those do look fun. If I can find the right storyteller, I might give this class a go, but right now, it's in the lowest category for me for a reason. So the next cluster of classes that I'm going to talk about is my short-term campaign classes. These are the classes that I would consider for games that I know are going to run for a little while, but that I don't think are going to run for a very long time. A lot of these classes have some interesting mechanical options, or some interesting mechanical variety, but just kind of lack the depth that I would want for a character in a long-term campaign. Now, the four main classes on this list are number 12, the Bard, number 11, the Fighter, number 10, the Sorcerer, and number 9, the Champion. And I'm going to go ahead and insert two other classes kind of halfway into this section of the list. Coming in at 10.5 is the Magus class, and coming in at 9.5 is the Cloistered Cleric subclass. So let's talk about these. Again, all of these classes I feel have some interesting mechanical variety or have something unique to offer, even if I do feel like the overall depth of the class may be a bit lacking. Let's start with number 12, the oddball of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the Bard class. If you saw my previous video, my summary of this class is, I don't know what I think of this class. It is a very weird class for me. One of my favorite things about 2nd Edition is the fact that they have gone to 4 spellcasting traditions. Instead of just Arcane and Divine, now you have Arcane, Divine, Occult, and Primal. And every tradition kind of has a flagship class that represents that spellcasting tradition. You have Wizards for Arcane, you have Clerics for Divine, you have Druids for Primal, and then you have Bards for Occult. I'm sorry, Paizo, but the Witch class really should have been the standard bearer for Occult Magic. Bard just feels weird in this role, and I don't know if I'm ever going to lose that sensation with the Bard class. I love the Occult Magic tradition. I think it is very intelligent and well designed. I think that that new way of handling magical traditions was very intelligent. I still feel like Bard was not quite the right class to occupy this slot. And overall, Bard has just left me with this impression of a class that's kind of all over the place, and my enjoyment of this class is also a little bit all over the place. There's things I really like, there's things that make me pause and wonder. There's a lot going on here, and it's hard to separate out the engaging from the less engaging. I feel like the Advanced Player's Guide has tried to push the Bard a little bit more in the direction of the 1st edition Bard. For good or ill, I'm not entirely sure, but they did offer a new subclass for the Bard, which was the Warrior Muse in the APG. And I will say, I like that. The Bard class as a whole may be a little confusing, but I will admit I'm a big fan of extra mythology here on YouTube, and I did enjoy their series on Celtic myths, and the Warrior Muse really struck that Celtic myth vibe for me. So there are definitely some things in this class that I think I could enjoy. Overall, I feel like Bard is going to remain the weird class in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I don't know if it was the right fit for what Paizo wanted to do here, but I will admit there are some fun things that I think I would enjoy bringing out for at least a shorter campaign. Now, number 11 is the Fighter, and the Fighter is one of those classes that has really taken a step up in my estimation from the Core Rulebook to the APG. If you saw my previous review, the quick and dirty version of that is the Fighter is boring to me because of the lack of defined subclasses. Mechanically, the class is good. In fact, arguably mechanically the class is strongest in the game. But that lack of subclasses really leaves the Fighter lacking narrative hooks that make it compelling for me as something I would want to portray in a long-term campaign. But one of the things that I said in my previous video was this: one of the best aspects of 2nd Edition as a whole is the archetype system. Moving away from multi-classing and to the use of the archetype system is, at least in my opinion, one of the best things that Paizo did with 2nd Edition. And the Fighter class is definitely the class in the game that is best positioned to make use of the archetype system. If you like archetypes, Fighter is the best class for trying out some of these cool archetypes that the game has to offer. The reason is really simple. Archetypes require you to burn class feats. Well, martial characters get 11 class feats instead of the 10 class feats that you get with casting classes. That means that you have essentially an extra class feat that you can give up to the archetype that you're wanting to take. Fighter is among the classes that has the most room to give up some of its class feats so that it can try out an archetype. But on top of that, the Fighter has combat flexibility and improved flexibility, which are basically just 2 free class feats that they can take every day. Now, you can't use your combat flexibility and improved flexibility class feats for an archetype feat, but those two class feats can kind of fill the gap from where you took archetype feats at earlier levels. So, there is less opportunity cost for a fighter who wants to use one of the archetypes available in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and especially some of the fun options from the APG. And I have to say, there is something mechanically beautiful about stapling some fun archetypes onto such a mechanically powerful class like the fighter. I definitely feel like the fighter plus some of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition archetypes opens up a lot of really, really fun character concepts. But I do still have to kind of rank the fighter lower on my list because archetypes are really optional elements in the game, and if you need optional elements to make your class compelling, then that does mean that your class is a little bit bland by itself, so fighter is still at number 11 on my list. Number 10 is the Sorcerer, and I just have to say, Paizo did well with the Sorcerer. In my previous video, I complained that the subclasses or bloodlines for the Sorcerer were okay, but not great. Well, Paizo's doing better with that. The new Genie Bloodlines are very interesting, and you'll notice plural. The Genie Bloodline is not one bloodline, it's 5 separate bloodlines that each have their own slightly unique spin and flavor on that particular bloodline, in addition to the other 3 bloodlines that got brought in with the APG. As I said in my old video, the Barbarian showed that you can take a single subclass and with a few minor tweaks really expand the number of character options that you're giving players, and this is a good example of how that's done. They took one bloodline, the Genie Bloodline, gave it 5 variations which are each distinct in meaningful ways, and in so doing created a lot of variety for players, and I do have to give Paizo props for that. That is something that I like to see. Hopefully, as Paizo moves forward, we'll see more subclasses like this for Sorcerer and for the other classes in the game. Also, while we're on the Sorcerer, one of the things that I like from the Advanced Player Guide is how they play with the concept of ancestral magic. Sorcerers have class feats that give them special options related to spells that are coming not from the Sorcerer class, but rather from their ancestry and ancestry feats. And that is something I really like as well. This allows for some unique and flavorful sorcerers in your games, and if you really want to play up the concept of an exemplar of a particular ancestry in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the Sorcerer might be the right class to do that. So Paizo, bravo! I definitely like what you did with the Sorcerer. I don't know if I could pull an entire campaign out of it, but I could see this showing up in shorter games. And then number 9 is the Champion. Now if you're looking at this compared to my previous list, it looks like the Champion really took a hit here, but honestly, I was kind of surprised the Champion wound up so low on my list. It's not that the Champion is bad, it's just that the other classes, we're starting to get into really good class territory here, and the Champion just didn't quite cut it compared to what some of the other classes got. And mostly, that is, the Champion options in the APG focused almost exclusively on evil champions. Yes, I know that there are people who are interested in those class options, and I'll admit that they did a good job with those class options, although I still complain that Anti-Paladin is a dumb name. Paizo, you could have figured out something better than that. Just overall, I'm probably never going to use the evil options for the Champion, and that means that pretty much when it comes to the Champion, all that I have right now is the core rulebook material. The other classes grew, and the Champion, at least for me personally, did not. I am looking forward to the neutral champions, especially the lawful neutral champions. I think that those are going to be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what Paizo does with those. But for now, the champion has fallen for me because it just didn't get much. At least it didn't get much that I find compelling. Now, the two sub-entries in this particular category. First off, at 10.5, we have the Magus. The Magus is currently in playtest for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and by the way, if you go to paizo.com, you can download the playtest document and you can actually try out the Magus in your game. I am currently running an NPC Magus and an NPC Summoner through my campaign to see how they hold up. Since this is a playtest class right now, when it comes to the Magus and the Summoner, I'm definitely guessing. Their final evaluation could change and could change dramatically. Overall, Magus is a class that is interesting, but I am very hesitant about. Basically, Magus is a Gish class. If you don't know what that term means, Gish means you have a hybrid of a martial character with a spellcaster, and over multiple versions of fantasy RPGs, I've kind of come to the conclusion that Gish characters are never properly balanced. Sometimes they're too weak, frequently they're way too powerful, but they rarely feel like they're on par with the rest of the classes in the game. And I worry about that with the Magus. I'm afraid that that problem is going to rear its head again, but they are doing a good job with the Magus subclasses. Instead of just having the one-handed weapon Magus, they now have a shooting star Magus for range combat, and they have the sustaining steel Magus that allows you to spell strike with giant two-handed weapons. There are options here, and I can see the potential. So Paizo, I'm curious, I'm cautious, but I'm paying attention. And right now I feel like the Magus is probably in that I would play them in short games, but I want to see what you come up with, and maybe you can bring it a little higher up on the list. The other sub-entry in this category at 9.5 is the Cloistered Cleric. Paizo has been putting out a lot of material, and when it comes to the Cleric, it feels like all of the material is going to the Cloistered Cleric subclass. Now don't get me wrong, I do know that the War Priest can take some of these options, but it really feels like Paizo is focusing on options for the Cloistered Cleric. If you look at the book Lost Omens, Gods and Magic, Paizo increased the number of domains available to primarily Cloistered Clerics by 50%. I'm not even making that up. That's impressive. Increasing a rule set for a game by 50% is a lot, and Paizo has done that. And I'm going to go out and say the Core Rulebook domains, some of them don't really appeal to me that much, like the Confidence domain. I'm sorry, that just feels like a flavor fail to me. But a lot of the new domains and the new alternate domains in Lost Omens, Gods and Magic, like the Void domain, there's some good ideas there. There's some fun stuff, and I feel like you could get some interesting characters out of this. Now, the Cloistered Cleric is very much a spellcasting focused version of the Cleric. If you play this, you are playing a caster. I feel like Paizo's vision of the Cleric is almost exclusively a heavy caster class. But if you like the caster, they definitely gave you options. So I feel like the Cloistered subclass of the Cleric falls a little bit higher on the list. I'm going to sneak it in at a 9.5 rating compared to everything else. The War Priest, low levels it's good, high levels I'm just not there. And if you average the two together, I feel like the Cleric would definitely be low on the list. But the Cloistered Cleric in specific does a lot better than the War Priest. I'm still holding out for the Inquisitor Cleric. Paizo, I hope you're working on that, because that is something I want to see, and I do think it would pull the class a lot higher. So up next are my backup characters on this list. As we all know, you have the characters you really want to play, but sometimes RPGs don't go your way, and the character that you love doesn't make it through the fight scene, and you gotta roll up a backup character. Well, what are the characters that are going to come in after the primary characters for a campaign? These are the classes that I definitely could play long term. They may not be top of the field for me, but they're definitely something I would consider if I needed a backup character for a campaign. Well, at number 8 we have the Barbarian. At number 7 we have the Monk. At number 6 we have the Wizard. And at number 5 we have the Druid. And I'm going to go ahead and stick this in this category. At 4.5 we have the Summoner. So again, all of these classes are very strong to me. There's definitely a lot that appeals to me with these classes. They just aren't quite top tier for me. Now, the one that broke my heart a little bit when I was doing this list is definitely number 8, the Barbarian. Barbarian was number 3 on my previous version of the list. It was top tier before, and kind of like the Champion before it, the Barbarian just didn't get much that appeals to me in the Advanced Player's Guide. The new subclass for the Barbarian is the Superstition Instinct, which is basically the anti-magic instinct. And kind of like the Investigator that I complained about earlier in this video, the Superstition Instinct is really one of those only in the right game style characters. In most games, I would never play a Superstition Instinct Barbarian, and that's the only new subclass that they offered. Now, the Barbarian did get a lot of new class feats, and the Friendly Toss class feat is arguably the single best thing in the entire Advanced Player's Guide. Thank you for throwing the Fastball Special into the game, Paizo. But overall, I just feel like the Barbarian didn't get as much as other classes in the game got, and that kind of leaves the Barbarian relying on the stuff that was in the Core Rulebook. So I like what the Barbarian has, but it just didn't get much new material for me, and that's caused it to slide pretty far down the list, not because the old material is bad, but because the other classes just got really, really engaging new material that's kind of bumped the Barbarian down on my list. But, again, I could still totally see myself rolling up a Dragon or Animal Instinct Barbarian as a backup character in a campaign. There's still a lot of fun material here. Number 7 is the Monk, and, you know, Monk is a very consistent class for me. In old editions of D&D and Pathfinder, it was always a middle-of-the-road class for me. And on my previous list, it was a middle-of-the-road class, and here it is, again, in the middle of the road. Monk continues to lack a defined subclass, but still revolves around very interesting and unique feats that define its combat in very flavorful ways. Particularly with monks, you get a lot of stance-style feats that make combat feel very descriptive when you're playing a monk, and that's something I really enjoy. I feel like Paizo is continuing to put out good options for the monk, and I feel like it's just this very solid straight line. What the monk was before, it continues to be. I feel like it's holding its position really well, and there are definitely plenty of options that if I was looking to roll up a backup character for a game, I think Monk could have some fun options that I might consider. I do like how Paizo is using a lot of, I guess you could say, cinematic tropes with the Monk to help make their combat flavorful. For example, the Staggering Stance or the 1-Inch Punch class feats. I think those are fun takes on some well-known martial arts cinematic tropes, and I'm glad to see those in the game. So arguably, Monk did the best job keeping its relative position on this list. That's the Monk, a steady and reliable option that I do think will see some play from time to time for me. It does break my heart a little bit to admit that the Wizard is now number 6 on my list. Wizard truly is my all-time favorite class. When I think about RPGs as a whole, Wizard is a fantastic concept. I really, really enjoy the tropes associated with the Wizard. And I still love the fact that the Wizard gets to build their own subclass. That is the best thing about the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Wizard. There are so many different variations on Wizard available literally at level 1 that it's beautiful, and it really appeals to me on a creative instinct. However, the Advanced Player's Guide, I don't know if it gave me enough when it comes to the Wizard to really compete with things that other classes got. The only new build your own subclass option for the Wizard is I've got a really nice Wizard staff. I don't know, it doesn't quite do it for me. I mean, I'm glad the option is there. I'm sure there are some interesting builds you can get with that option, but I don't know if it meaningfully added to the flavor available for Wizards in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And while some spellcasting classes, such as the Sorcerer, really got a lot of new class feats, the Wizard doesn't feel like it got very many options. Yeah, there's a lot of new spells in the book, but other spellcasting classes have access to those too, so it's not as big of a point for Wizards. Don't get me wrong, I will probably roll up 4 or 5 different Wizards throughout my Pathfinder 2nd Edition gaming career. It is a class I love, and it is a class I definitely know I'm going to play. It's just fallen a couple of spots for me because, at least at the moment, it doesn't seem like Paizo is giving me quite as many options with the class. Suffering a similar fate to the Wizard is number 5, the Druid. Now, I still believe that Kaiju form is hands down the best spell ever written in an RPG. I love that. I think it's fantastic. But, kind of like the Wizard, the Druid got a small selection of new feats. It got some new spells, but those are available to other classes as well. It just kind of feels like the Druid didn't get as much from the Advanced Player's Guide. And unlike the Wizard, the Druid didn't get a single new subclass as an option. So, again, you have a class that kind of feels like it's relying almost exclusively on the core rulebook material. It doesn't feel like there's as much available for that class as there are for others. As such, Druid kind of took a tumble for me in my overall class rankings. Druid is still good, and I am definitely turning into Godzilla and stomping on something as a Druid at some point. It is happening. But there are other classes that I do have to say I find more compelling. Now, before I get to the cream of the crop on my class rankings in this video, I do really quick want to talk about the Summoner class from the Secrets of Magic Playtest because I'm really interested. The Summoner class is similar to the Sorcerer in that it has options that allow it to access all 4 of the spellcasting traditions. So there are Arcane Summoners, Divine Summoners, Occult Summoners, and Primal Summoners. In the playtest specifically, your spellcasting tradition is associated with the type of Eidolon that your summoner uses. So, if you're an Arcane Summoner, you have a dragon. If you're a Divine Summoner, you have an angel. If you're a Primal Summoner, I get Magic the Gathering vibes with the beast that you get to call. And then, my favorite of the 4 options, it looks like they are taking the Spiritualist from 1st edition and absorbing it into the Summoner class and giving the Occult Summoner its own pet ghost, the Devotion Phantom. And by the way, for all 4 of those, in the flavor text for the class, they list other options under those 4 general categories. So I think the final version is going to see other Eidolons and have even more variety available. And oh my goodness, this has me excited. I enjoyed playing Summoners in 1st edition. I enjoyed playing the Spiritualist in 1st edition. And the idea of playing a character who can call like angels into battle count me in. To say nothing of green mana Magic the Gathering, I'm tapping 8 forest and summoning some kind of giant beast to stomp face. There is a lot of good stuff with the summoner, but the mechanical execution of the summoner, at least right now, I'm very hesitant about. So this is a class that, again, could go either way. It's kind of like the Magus. There's things I really like, there's things I'm really hesitant about. We'll see where it ends up. But for right now, I'm going to put the Playtest Summoner in at 4.5 on my list. But let's move on to the cream of the crop. What are my top 4 classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? But now we come to the cream of the crop, in my opinion. These are the classes that are the most engaging to me personally. These are the ones where the mechanics and flavor of the class combine in such a way that it really, really inspires me to want to create characters using these particular concepts in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now for a little bit of dramatic flair, I'm going to do these one at a time. Starting with number 4 at my list, I'm going to bring one of the new advanced classes into the list for the first time with the Oracle. So the Oracle was a popular class in 1st edition, and they've brought it forward into 2nd edition. I will admit, initially I was a little nervous about the direction that they took with the Oracle, but I have to give Paizo credit for some incredible execution on the Oracle class. In the 1st edition version of the Oracle, you would pick a mystery and a curse, and both of those choices had particular mechanical effects on the game. So your mystery would offer you particular revelations that you could take, and then your curse would have both a detriment and some potential bonuses that would come with it, and you could kind of mix and match and build your own class. In 2nd edition, they actually toned down on the options a little bit. Instead of picking a mystery and a curse separately, now in Pathfinder 2nd edition, the Oracle, when they choose their mystery, they get a curse that is tied specifically to that mystery. Now this does cut down a little bit on how well you can kind of construct your own class with the Oracle, but Paizo, I think, made a good decision here, because by tying the curse to the mystery, they have been able to create very specific, very interesting, and very flavorful curses that really line up with the mystery that you've chosen. Before, curses were kind of generic, but now curses feel like a logical extension of what is happening with your class. My favorite curse, at least flavor-wise, has to be the Ancestors Mystery and Ancestors Curse. So the Ancestors Curse, basically, the ghosts of your old ancestors show up and start interfering with your actions if you aren't doing what they think you should be doing. This may be one of the greatest mechanical representations of the meddling grandparents I have ever seen. It is fantastic, and just bravo Paizo, I absolutely love it. I am sure it would be headache-inducing in a game, but I'm pretty sure I would be laughing the entire time because of just how flavorful and entertaining that particular curse is. And they have done this with every curse that the Oracle has. Whatever mystery you get a curse tied specifically to that mystery. Another fun and entertaining mystery curse combo comes with the Cosmos Mystery. On this one, you draw your divine power from the stars themselves, and your head is so in the clouds that your body is starting to lift off the ground whether or not you want it to. I just absolutely love how well they have done tying the specific curses to specific mysteries. It is extremely flavorful, it's extremely engaging. There are so many story ideas that pop up as soon as you start reading these different variations of the Oracle, and I think this is a very, very engaging class. Now, there is one advanced class I have not talked about yet, so obviously it's going to be higher on the list, but let me just say, mechanically, at this precise moment, I actually think the Oracle is the best mechanically constructed of the 4 advanced classes in the APG. There's one class that flavor-wise I like just a little bit more, but mechanically the Oracle, Paizo nailed it. This class is fantastic, it's a lot of fun, and I can't wait to try one out at the gaming table. Now, coming in number 3 on the list, oh man, I never thought I'd see the day. I never thought I'd see the day that Rogue was one of the classes I wanted to play the most. If you saw my previous video, Rogue was way down near the bottom of the list, and for a long time in RPGs, I understand the power of the Rogue, but I've never felt the appeal of the Rogue. Mechanically, I knew how to play them, but there was never anything that drew me into playing them. And that's been a true statement for a really long time. But Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the Advanced Player's Guide, brought so much to the table for rogues that I have ideas spinning all over the place. I suddenly find this to be one of the most engaging classes in the game. So really quick, let me talk about some of the things that I really love about the Rogue. Number 1, they are, I still believe, the most new player accessible of all of the classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Skill-focused classes are good for new players because the situations where your character are going to shine are not necessarily situations where you have to think quickly. Combat sometimes requires you to think on your feet, you have to react to things very quickly, and if you're a new player, you don't necessarily understand what your best options are. Spellcasting is even worse. If choosing between a few attack options can be complicated in the heat of the moment, choosing between numerous spell options can be even more overwhelming for new players. But skill-focused characters are extremely accessible to new players. The situations where your character is going to be front and center are often situations that are going to move a little bit slower at the gaming table, giving you more time to think and respond to what is happening in game. I feel like Paizo did a good job designing the 2nd Edition Rogue to make it a very new player accessible class, and that is still a strength of the Rogue that has been present since day 1 in 2E, but I feel like is still a huge selling point at the moment. But on top of that, the Rogue just got so many options in the APG that it kind of blows my mind. First off, the Rogue tied for the most new class feats of any of the existing classes, so Paizo definitely brought a lot of options to the table for the Rogue, but on top of that, they gave the Rogue 2 new subclasses. Now, as a disaster tour guide, one of those subclasses very obviously is something that I'm going to enjoy, and that's the Mastermind. I've never seen this written down anywhere, but I'm pretty sure that it's a law that all storytellers have to spend a good 30 minutes prior to every game session just laughing maniacally so that you get in the right frame of mind. Naturally, the Mastermind subclass for the Rogue is just very engaging for me as a storyteller. It offers a lot of ideas and opportunities, and if you want to play a very cunning character, the Mastermind is the perfect opportunity to do so. Also, as a little bit of a side note, throughout Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Paizo has subtly but consistently pushed the value of recall knowledge checks in other games. They have made the system of identifying monsters more specific and I feel more pertinent to how the game flows. And the Mastermind is an example of this. A Mastermind who successfully recalls knowledge about a foe is suddenly a lot more dangerous against the foe. Mechanically and flavorfully, that feels so good. But that's not even my favorite thing about the Rogue. Now, before I say this, I feel like I need to offer a word of precaution. A lot of people really misunderstand my opinions on Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. Overall, I actually enjoy D&D 5e. I'm not invested in the game, but I've played it many times and I enjoy the game, and I feel like it's a good game. When people hear that I exclusively play, run, and invest in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, they often think that I am hostile to D&D, when really I just have enough money for one game. 2 if you count Starfinder. But I do have to say, if you look at D&D and Pathfinder head-to-head, Pathfinder's Rogue is flexing hard on the D&D 5e Rogue. The Pathfinder 2e Rogue, the more I look at it, the more I observe the options, the more I just really feel like Paizo has shown us how it's done. There is somebody at Paizo who loves the Rogue, and the best evidence of that is the Eldritch Trickster subclass for the Rogue. In all previous editions of Pathfinder and D&D, it has been the Arcane Trickster. Here is a variation on the Rogue that gets some arcane spells that they can use in tandem with their roguish ways. Well, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Arcane has been replaced with Eldritch, which basically tells us that the Rogue now can draw from any of the 4 magical traditions in determining what type of magic they have available to them. That means you could have an Eldritch Trickster Rogue who draws on divine magic. Maybe they are a thief working for Calistria. Or you could have an Eldritch Trickster Rogue who uses occult magic and makes far too good of use of the various mental effects available in that particular tradition. I haven't quite come up with a concept for a rogue that uses primal magic yet, but I guarantee you there's some fun options there. And then you still have the classic arcane version of the Eldritch Trickster available. However, it's more than just the rogue can draw from any particular tradition of magic. The way they set the Eldritch Trickster up is the rogue gets a free multiclass with any spellcasting class. That means that you can have a rogue sorcerer, a rogue witch, a rogue oracle, a rogue cleric. There are so many combinations that have been built into a single subclass, and as we've talked about before, I like subclasses with subclasses. Give me options. The Eldritch Trickster is options galore. It is beautiful. It is so well done. Bravo, Paizo. I never thought I'd see the day that a rogue beat out a wizard in terms of what I want to build as a player. By the way, as a teaser, one of the videos I'm scripting out right now is a Spell Thief Rogue, which is a legitimate build available thanks to the Advanced Player's Guide. But that's number 3 on my list, the Rogue. For number 2 on my list, I'm going to talk about the last of the advanced classes from the APG, which is the Witch. Now, I said this earlier, mechanically I feel like right now the Witch is a little bit weaker than the Oracle, but I feel like the Witch is in a good place to grow to something absolutely amazing, and I am already very impressed with the class. Paizo has made the Witch a prepared spellcaster that can potentially draw from any of the 4 spellcasting traditions. Flexibility is a good thing. That's a lot of variability in your class, so excellent start on the Witch there. But one of the things that I have to applaud the Witch for in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is the fact that your patron is a much more flexible, nebulous, and, dare I say, shifty concept than it was in 1st Edition. In Pathfinder 1st Edition, the Witch was powerful. It was commonly commented on. Many people mentioned it, many people discussed it. I knew that the Witch was powerful, but honestly, I very rarely was interested in playing one because it just didn't feel like the mechanics of the class were interesting or engaging to me. They've changed that. Now, your patron is not necessarily a specific concept or a specific thing. Now your patron is a much more shadowy and potentially nefarious concept. Your patron reveals themselves through lessons. As you take more lessons via class feats, you learn a little bit more about your patron, and a little bit more about what your patron is doing, and maybe why your patron is so keen on helping you. The flavor of this is amazing. By opening this class up to 4 different spellcasting traditions, you open yourself up to a wide variety of patrons and patron motivations. And then, by slowly revealing who the patron is and what the patron is doing over the course of a 20-level character build, it is flavor perfection. This is how you do flavor right in a character. I think I've mentioned this in another video, but I will say it again here. One of the most interesting concepts that I could come up with for the witch would be a situation where when I take a new lesson in the witch class, I don't know which lesson I'm going to get. You would have to have a good relationship with your storyteller, with your dungeon master. This is definitely a setup where you want to make sure you get along with your storyteller before you try this, but I think it would be a lot of fun to go in blind on the witch's lessons that happen as the class progresses. I mentioned before that I like the wizard because you build your own subclass. Well, with the wizard, I feel like the build your own subclass is a little front-loaded at level 1. With the witch, the build your own subclass is now this slow and engaging storytelling progression throughout the course of the entire game. I love it, it's amazing, it's number 2 on my list, the witch. Of course, that means I really can't bury the lead on the number 1 most interesting class in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, which is the Alchemist. So, one of the things about the Alchemist that probably weights it a little heavier for me than it may for other people is the flexibility of the class. Depending on the subclass that you choose and the alchemical items that you create, you can really take the Alchemist a lot of different directions. In the Core Rulebook, you had the Bomber, the Mutagenist, and the Chirurgeon. So you kind of had a ranged DPS model. You had a melee combat model, whether it's a melee DPS or melee tank. You had the Mutagenist for options there. And then you had a healer option in the Chirurgeon. Well, the Advanced Player's Guide has added a 4th subclass, the Toxicist, meaning that Poisoner or Rogue is basically now an Alchemist subclass. So with the Alchemist, you already start out with a level of flexibility that allows you to do a decent impression of essentially the 4 main character concepts in fantasy role-playing. So bravo to Paizo for that. But then the flexibility of the class expands even more wildly when you look at all of the alchemical items that you have access to. Now, granted, anyone can potentially access alchemical items, but as the Alchemist, you definitely specialize in them. Paizo has done a fantastic job of taking alchemy and pulling it out of spellcasting and really making it its own unique system inside the game. Flavor-wise, I love that. In 1st edition, alchemy was basically slightly toned down arcane potion brewing. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the Alchemist that I played in 1st edition, but now that alchemy is its own thing, the flavor of the class is just so much more engaging. By the way, Advanced Player's Guide, Sovereign Glue is now an alchemical item. That's a win. But Alchemist just really feels like a class where the opportunity to be flexible and respond to just about any situation in the game is truly there. Do you need to swallow a mutagen and go toe-to-toe with a monster? You can. Do you want to chuck bombs from a distance? You can. Do you need to heal a party member? You can. Do you need to be cunning and drop some poison into a particular drink? You can. And the best part is, even though you have a specialty as an alchemist, you still have the other options available to you. The Alchemist class is hands down the most flexible class in the game, and flexibility to me is a powerful, powerful attribute, so I absolutely love that about the Alchemist class, and with the expanded options from the Advanced Player's Guide, it really has moved to the #1 class I would love to play in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So, here's a quick review of my list as it stands today with all of the material up to the Advanced Player's Guide. Number 16, the Investigator. Number 15, the Cleric, specifically the War Priest. Number 14, the Ranger. Number 13, the Swashbuckler. Number 12, the Bard. Number 11, the Fighter. Squeezing in at a 10.5, we have the Magus Playtest class. And then our actual number 10 is the Sorcerer. Squeezing in at 9.5, we have the Cleric with the Cloistered Cleric subclass. At number 9, we have the Champion. Number 8, the Barbarian. Number 7, the Monk. Number 6, the Wizard. Number 5, the Druid. Sneaking in at a tentative 4.5, the Summoner Playtest class. And then the actual number 4, the new Oracle class from the Advanced Player's Guide. Number 3, the surprise power player of this list, the Rogue. Number 2, the Witch. And my personal favorite class, mechanics and flavor combined, the Alchemist. This is my personal ranking for all of the classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but let me throw the conversation over to you. How would you rank the classes that are on this list? Are there classes that you would put higher or lower on the list? Are there classes that you feel I'm missing something in how I evaluate them? Again, leave your comments down below, be a part of the conversation. Thanks again for joining me, and have a wonderful day. Can you get them again? Can you get them again? Oh, good job, buddy. Good job. Good job.